Bournemouth is a seaside town on the south coast of Great Britain. This documentary was made by final year history students at Bournemouth University, working in collaboration with our client, the Dorset History Centre, who are based in Dorchester. They gave us a brief to put together a story of the development of Bournemouth. From the beaches to the winter gardens, rail station to famous visitors, all shall be revealed in this documentary, as this is Becoming Bournemouth. London and South Western Railway reached Southampton, just 30 miles away from Bournemouth, in 1840. At the time, Bournemouth was not considered to be a settlement important enough to warrant its own railway station, its population only being approximately 1,000. So the original line from Southampton, built in 1847, bypassed Bournemouth via Ringwood and Wimborne. Over the next decade, Bournemouth continued to flourish and grow, making it an attractive location for a railway station. Local interest promoted the idea of a Bournemouth railway station, a 7 3/4 mile line from the northern already established Southampton to Christchurch line. The route was to follow the course of the River Avon. The London and South Western Railway were no longer opposed to there being a railway to Bournemouth, and on the 8th of August 1859, the railway obtained its authorising Act of Parliament having a capital of £45,000. The line connecting Christchurch to the main line, worked by London and South Western Railway, opened on the 13th of November 1862. Initially, the line was not well supported, yet the company persevered, using an act to gain £30,000 of investment to build a 3.5-mile track linking Christchurch to Bournemouth. The original station was built on the east side of Holdenhurst Road. It is now situated on the west side of the road. An article in the Poole and South Western Herald, published on the 17th of March 1870, criticised the location of the station as it felt it was located too far out of the town. The line to Bournemouth opened on the 14th of March 1870, initially with just 5 trains a day. Though the line was owned by the Ringwood, Christchurch and Bournemouth Railway Company, it was worked by London and South Western Railway, who in return for working the line received half of the gross receipts. The journey from Ringwood to Bournemouth originally took 35 minutes. Today, it takes just 15 minutes. With more and more passengers using the railway to visit Bournemouth, the Ringwood, Christchurch and Bournemouth Railway Company soon saw an improvement in its financial state, with trains from Bournemouth to London being arranged from the 1st of March 1872. The relatively small company was now able to pay dividends. Due to its increasing popularity, the Bournemouth train station needed to be reconstructed. It was rebuilt on the west side of Holdenhurst Road, where it still stands to this day, opening on the 20th of July 1885. The edifice of Bournemouth train station is a listed building and has recently undergone refurbishment. Why not visit the station to see the magnificent Victorian architecture? At the dawn of the Industrial Age, brilliant engineers were designing the first railways, but who took the hard graft of building them? The job of building the railway fell to vast gangs of itinerant labourers, also known as navvies. By 1850, 250,000 workers, a force bigger than the Army and Navy combined, had laid down 3,000 miles of railway line across Britain, connecting people like never before. The word navvy comes from the navigators who built the first navigational canals in the 18th century, at the very dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Railway navvies came to be their own distinct group of workers due to the specific nature of the work. They were well paid by Victorian standards, however the work was extremely hard and quite often dangerous. The navvies were assembled by huge swathes of both male and female workers from across the British Isles and continental Europe. Many of these workers came from Ireland, where they were fleeing the famine. Around 15,000 travellers living in Britain today are descendants of these Irish navvies. Being a navvy was a nomadic existence, traipsing from job to job. With their families, they lived in appalling conditions, often for years and years, in huts made from timber and turf along the railway lines and tunnels that they had built. Despite these horrendous living conditions, the navvies undertook incredible feats of engineering with little more than gunpowder, picks and shovels. In the 1840s, the navvies did not receive any compensation for death or injury caused during the construction of the railway. They were even denied the right to adequate housing, safe working conditions and sanitation. For example, when constructing the Woodhead Tunnel in the Pennines, the death rate of the navvies who built it was higher than the death rate of soldiers who fought at the Battle of Waterloo. Although railway work created a sense of pride and identity, hardship and danger were common. Even after the Woodhead Tunnel scandal, railway companies sometimes operated with a ruthlessness that cost the lives of thousands of workers, who were being killed at a rate of nearly 500 a year in the 1880s and 90s. Once the railway was built, workers were needed to operate the railway, and by 1900 over 5% of the British population, approximately 620,000 people, worked for the railway. In some cities, entire areas evolved to serve the railways, with their ancillary workshops springing up to provide parts for major manufacturers. Railway workers formed associations and unions to improve their working and living conditions or to press for radical social change, yet company loyalty and the division of labour hindered class solidarity. Each of the railway trades generated its own shared identities, traditions and cultures, which meant that a signalman sometimes felt he had as little in common with a locomotive fireman as with an agricultural labourer. The effects of this are still being felt today in the complex and often bewildering industrial relations of Britain's railways. Guards, station staff and drivers still negotiate separately with their employers, and demarcation disputes that have their origins in the 19th century cause strikes that frustrate 21st century passengers. By the end of the 19th century, most of Britain's railway network was complete, and navvies had better food, housing and sanitation. Working conditions had changed too. When the Great Central Railway was built in the 1890s, construction relied just as much on steam as muscle power. The number of navvies dwindled, but their lifestyle persisted as they moved to new construction projects, built railways overseas, or turned to road building. History may have remembered the Brunels and Stevensons of the Railway Revolution, the bright minds and ingenious businessmen and engineers who dreamt of a truly modern transport network, but without the hard work and sacrifice of thousands of navvies, their dreams would never have been realised. Railway identity encompasses class solidarity, company loyalty, a sense of place and pride in the job, and is as important now as it was when the first commercial railways began to operate nearly 200 years ago. Navvies may no longer be familiar figures, but they were crucial to the foundation of the railways we know today. In the early 1800s, the area known as Bournemouth was a wild and virtually uninhabited heathland, divided by picturesque valleys known as chines, with rough roads used by travellers during the day and allegedly by smugglers at night. By the end of the century, Bournemouth's population had grown from 401 to over 60,000 and was now a thriving resort visited by affluent travellers. The growth of the town was aided by the 1802 Enclosure Act, which allowed the land previously used by commoners to graze their animals to be purchased and built upon. Bournemouth was popularised in 1841 by Dr. Augustus B. Granville, who included it in his guidebook entitled The Spas of England, in which he suggested ways in which the town could be improved. This led to Bournemouth becoming a major spa town where patrons sought treatment from medical experts based there. Of course, as it is now, Bournemouth Beach was one of the main tourist attractions. Developments in rail travel drastically improved how far and how quickly people could travel, making day trips ever more popular. As a result, people flocked to Bournemouth to stay in its newly built hotels and bathe on its beautiful beaches. As the town grew in size and popularity, it quickly expanded to include more leisure areas and hotels. Here are some of the original Bournemouth hotels, the majority of which are still open today. The first two hotels, the Bath Hotel and the Bellevue, opened in 1838. The Bellevue Hotel, built where the Pavilion now stands, was originally run by Mr. Slidell and became known as the Bellevue and Pier Hotel in 1856, later simply known as the Pier Hotel. Interestingly, the first town council met in 1856 at the hotel and set the town boundaries as a 1-mile radius from the hotel under the Bournemouth Improvement Act. This was a diverse hotel, with assembly rooms used for meetings, dancing, concerts, and a place of worship. Sadly, by 1925 the hotel was no longer, with the completion of the pavilion which still stands in the town and is still used for events and productions. Bath Hotel, commissioned by George Taps Jervis, opened on Queen Victoria's coronation day in 1838. This hotel became known as the Royal Bath Hotel in 1856, when the Prince of Wales Edward VII visited Bournemouth and stayed at the hotel. The Royal Bath was a magnet for the glitterati of the day, with guests including David Lloyd George, Benjamin Disraeli and Oscar Wilde. The Royal Bath sits atop a hill on the East Overcliff with stunning sea views which include the Pier, Purbeck Hills and the Isle of Wight. Nestled in 3 acres of gardens, the hotel is truly a grand dame of the Victorian era. With its magnificent Victorian architecture, the hotel is not to be missed on a visit to Bournemouth. The Royal Exeter Hotel was originally a private residence built by Lewis Tregonwell in 1812, making it one of Bournemouth's oldest buildings. You can find it situated between Bournemouth Beach and the gardens. The first guest to stay in the building was the Marchioness of Exeter in 1820, after whom the hotel is named. Royalty from across the world seemed to have a fascination with Bournemouth, as Elizabeth of Prussia stayed at the hotel in 1888. The Mont d'Or Hotel was opened in 1885 and is now used as the town hall. The foundation stone was laid by the King of Sweden in 1881. The Mont d'Or Hotel was internationally renowned for its fine architecture, beauty and splendour. One of the first telephones in the country was installed at the Mont d'Or Hotel. The phone number was simply 3, demonstrating how few telephones there were at the time. During the First World War, the hotel was used as a field hospital and has since been converted into the town hall. The Arlington Hotel was built in 1864. Like the Royal Exeter Hotel, it was originally built to be a private residence. Records indicate the original 98-year lease on the property was for £12 a year, £1,563 in today's money. This indicates that the town had a lot of land to offer at the time and was looking for investment. It wasn't until after the railway reached Bournemouth in 1870 that the Arlington Hotel developed to be able to hold some of the town's visitors. Yet it was not until 1920 that the Arlington was solely used as a hotel. The Norfolk Royal Hotel was originally 2 adjacent private residences built by Sir George Taps and his aforementioned son George Taps Jervis. In 1870, the 2 residences were joined together to create the Stuart's Hotel. The Stuart's Hotel became a firm favourite of the 15th Duke of Norfolk, Henry Fitzalan Howard, and his wife. Nobody really knows why, but maybe it was because of the hotel's close proximity to the church. The only known record of their visits is in an edition of the Bournemouth Guardian published in 1883, listed in the famous visitors section. As a tribute to the Duke of Norfolk, the hotel was renamed the Norfolk Royal in 1910. Various suites within the hotel, such as the Beaumont and Surrey, were named after various historic Dukes of Norfolk. Originally, the beautiful Bournemouth gardens we see today were merely garden walks. Between 1836 and 1840, the local landowner Sir George Jervis, later the Mayrick Estate, appointed the architect Benjamin Foray to create an estate on the east side of the Bourne, the river that runs through the centre of Bournemouth. As part of the development, the private Westover pleasure grounds, later known as the Lower Central Gardens, were laid out. In 1845, the architect Decimus Burton succeeded Benjamin Foray and advised that the Lower Bourne Valley be laid out as pleasure grounds. Subsequently, the Westover pleasure grounds were further improved and extended to the northwest along the banks of the Bourne. In 1859, the Mayrick Estate granted a 21-year lease for the pleasure grounds to the borough of Bournemouth. This was followed in 1872 by consent from Sir George Mayrick to the appropriation of the Bourne Valley for use as public gardens for the inhabitants of Bournemouth. In that same year, a competition took place for the design of the Lower Central Gardens. The competition was won by Philip Henry Tree. Most of his proposals were adopted, but Burton's layout was largely retained. In 1873, the site of the Upper Central Gardens, also situated in the Bourne Valley, became town property and were turned into a park as part of the improvement of the Lower Central Gardens. By 1898, Messrs. Pullum & Son had improved the banks of the Bourne in both the Lower and Upper Central Gardens. The Pleasure Gardens and Koi Pond Gardens are included on the Register of Parks and Gardens at Grade 2 for the following principal reasons. It is a good example of a series of mid-C19 seaside gardens created with the advice from the architect Decimus Burton as part of the development of Bournemouth as a seaside resort. Despite having undergone a number of substantial changes, it has survived sufficiently intact to reflect its original design. They make a significant contribution to the interest and understanding of the historic development of Bournemouth as a Victorian seaside town. In the summer, the gardens now play host to the annual Air Festival at night. In the winter, the gardens transform into a winter wonderland of trees, ice skating, and an alpine bar. The Winter Gardens, a concert hall, was opened in 1875. Sadly, this building is no longer around. The Winter Gardens were built in the style of the Crystal Palace in London. They were originally an exhibition centre for orchestras with a capacity of over 4,000. The initial exhibitions were not popular enough to keep the business afloat, and after several closures and reopenings, it was decided to try and make it a dedicated music venue. It was first used as a music concert hall in 1893 and meant that Bournemouth was the first municipal town to regularly provide music. Theatre Royal was opened in 1882 with a capacity of 800 and costing around £10,000 to build. That's over £1.2 million in today's money. It was designed by Kemp Welch of Bournemouth and Swanage. However, it was not an instant success and often struggled to fill capacity. In 1887, the theatre was briefly transformed into the town hall, but was refurbished and made into a theatre again in 1892. Some even described it as the most comfortable and pretty theatre in the south of England. In 1892, future two-time Prime Minister Winston Churchill had an accident which left him unconscious for a few days while staying in his relative's house in Bournemouth. While there have been many debates by historians about where the accident took place, it was either at Braxton Dean or Alum Chai. Winston would always say it was Alan Chime, as he explained in his biography, My Early Life, written in 1930. The extract from Winston's biography about the incident reads, "My aunt, Lady Wimborne, had lent us her comfortable estates in Bournemouth for the winter, 40 or 50 acres of pine forest descended by sandy undulations terminating in cliffs to the smooth beach of the English Channel. After I'd been hunted for 20 minutes and was rather short of breath, I decided to cross the bridge. Arrived at its centre, I saw to my consternation that the pursuers had divided their forces. One stood at each end of the bridge. Capture seemed certain. But in a flash, there came across me a great project. The chine in which the bridge spanned was full of young fir trees. Their slender tops reached to the level of the footway. Would it not, I asked myself, be possible to leap from one of them and slip down the pole-like stem, breaking off each tier of branches as one descended until the fall was broken? It was 3 days before I regained consciousness, and more than 3 months before I crawled from my bed. The measured fall was 29 feet onto hard ground, but no doubt the branches helped. My mother, summoned by the alarming message from the children, "He jumped over the bridge and he won't speak to us," hurried down with energetic aid and inopportune brandy. Winston was very fond of the Bournemouth area and would attend the openings of the Liberal Club in Upper Parkstone in 1909. Merton Russell Coates and his wife Annie moved to Bournemouth in 1876 and purchased the Bath Hotel, which they subsequently enlarged and renamed the Royal Bath Hotel in honour of the Prince of Wales who had stayed there in 1856. Merton, a wealthy, self-made man, became a prominent resident of Bournemouth who worked tirelessly to promote the town's reputation as a health resort. The very reason he had come to Bournemouth was in order to improve his own health, and was elected mayor in 1894 to 1895. Whilst living at the Royal Bath, Merton and Annie travelled wildly all over the world, visiting Australia, America, Egypt, India, Japan, the Near East and Pacific Islands. They returned from each trip with numerous souvenirs and artworks which were put on display around the hotel. By 1897, when the Royal Bath was overflocking with the items they had collected, Merton commissioned a local architect, John Frederick Fogarty, to design a house alongside the hotel. In 1908, Merton and Annie received the freedom of the borough, and the following year Merton was knighted by King Edward VII. After announcing that they were giving their home and huge collections of treasures to the people of Bournemouth, Sir Merton and Lady Russell Coates continued to live at the East Cliff Hall until their deaths in 1920 and 1921, respectively. The following year, Bournemouth Borough Council opened the property to the public as an art gallery and museum. Currently, there are approximately 50,000 entries in the museum's database, which include items which have been generously donated by the relatives of Merton and Annie, as well as various members of the general public. Merton was a connoisseur dealer and collector who acquired many highly prized items, including Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Venus Verticordia, and was quite a follower of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. He acquired Napoleon's dispatch bag, and also the axe reputedly used to behead Mary, Queen of Scots. Frederick Abberline, the Chief Inspector for the Metropolitan Police, investigator of the Jack the Ripper murder cases, had a history with the Dorset area. He was born in Blandford Forum, and when he retired for the final time in 1904, he moved back to the Dorset area, settling in Bournemouth. He was 61 years old at the time of his retirement, and bought a house with his wife at 195 Holdenhurst Road, and enjoyed a long and peaceful retirement. Abberline would later die in his Bournemouth home on the 10th of December 1929, and his wife would pass away a year later. Abberline was buried in an unmarked grave at Wimborne Cemetery. Interestingly, Montague Druitt, one of the Jack the Ripper suspects, was buried in the same cemetery as him. Bournemouth also has history to another Conservative Prime Minister, with his family roots from the area. Winifred Emma Mary Kemel was married to Ali Kemel of the Ottoman Empire. Winifred came back to Britain in 1909 and gave birth to their son Osman Ali Wilfred Kemel. Winifred died in Christchurch after she gave birth. Osman was placed in the care of his grandmother, Boris Johnson's great-great-grandmother Margaret Johnson, and was later renamed Wilfred Johnson due to Wilfred's Ottoman heritage, and with the Ottoman Empire being allied to the Central Powers with Germany and Austria-Hungary during the First World War. Wilfred would later serve in the Second World War, and later be father to Stanley Johnson, a former MEP who is the father of Boris Johnson, the current leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Boscombe Pier had their own attraction during the end of the 19th century, the Boscombe Whale. A 65 to 70 foot long whale, which weighed 40 tons, had apparently been killed after being run by a tramp steamer near Southbourne and eventually washed up on the beach of Boscombe. Bournemouth GP Dr. Spencer Simpson arranged for the whale to be cut up as the stench was getting out of control. The remains of the whale were a popular sight and often drew in a large crowd. The skeleton of the whale was eventually put on the pier, However, the pier could still not make enough money as there were not many other attractions for tourists. The new owner of the pier eventually ground the whale skeleton down to make fertilizer. The whale skeleton was popular with children. There was even a rhyme about it. Have you been to Budgen? Have you seen the whale? Have you stood on its back? And have you smelt its tail? Bournemouth has also got a rich history with the Russians in Ilford and Tuckton. However, the Edwardian residents included an enclave of revolutionary Russians, who were the exiled dissidents and dedicated to the printing and distributions of the works of Leo Tolstoy, which were then banned in the motherland of Russia. These Russians in Bournemouth were led by the wealthy Count Vladimir Cherkov, who was the son of aide-camper Grigory Ivanovich. Also, Vladimir was a childhood friend of future Tsar Alexander III, who ruled Russia as an authoritarian figure following the assassination of his reformist father, Alexander II, in 1881. Having embraced the devout Christian liberalism of his mother, the Countess, Cherkov was already at odds with the Tsarist regime and had resigned his military career in 1879, leaving court to throw himself into the education of the serfs. By 1897, the authorities had also turned on Cherkov, who chose to live abroad over internal exile and arrived in England to settle at Tuckton House, where Tolstoy had enjoyed a summer holiday in 1894. His mother had a holiday home in the area called Slavanka, nearby the Bellevue Road in Southport-on-Sea. Cherkov brought with him 30 or so other émigrés, mainly middle-class artisans and professionals, who were resolved to publish the works of their mentor. To this end, Cherkov rented the old waterworks at Ilford, built in 1875 as a pumping station by Bournemouth Gas and Water Company, and established the Free Age Press. Cherkov liaised with publishers, translators, and distributors, smuggling the unexpurgated works to and from Russia. Tolstoy's handwritten manuscripts were stored in a strong room with concrete walls 18 inches thick, which were lined with fire bricks, a steel-grilled door, and a narrow iron-barred slit for ventilation. Considered fireproof, damp-proof, and earthquake-proof, when the house was demolished in 1965, it took the two workmen a full week to make a 15-inch hole in the wall. Another interesting Russian connection that Bournemouth has is Sir Anthony Blunt. Blunt was a spy for the Soviet Union and was recruited when he was at Cambridge, becoming part of what was to be known as the Cambridge 5 spy ring. Blunt was also known for being an art historian, as well as the surveyor of the Queen's pictures. He was later stripped of his knighthood after his involvement with being a KGB spy. Blunt was born in 1907, not long after his family had moved down towards the area in 1906. The reason for the move was because of Blunt's father, Arthur Stanley Bohan Blunt, had been appointed vicar of the Holy Trinity Church, which was considered the most fashionable church in all of Bournemouth. During the year of 1914, the war to end all wars began when a Serbian terrorist assassinated the heir to the Habsburg dynasty, and with the different empires and nations of Europe now up against each other, Britain joined the war. This part of the documentary is to remember the men that had left Bournemouth to fight on the front lines. These men sacrificed their lives to bring peace to our once great empire by serving their country well, lest we forget. To learn more about the history of Bournemouth, you can visit the Dorset History Centre, Bridport Road, Dorchester, DT1 1RP. And if you're ever in the Bournemouth area, why not do our own walking tour? Visit the Geotourist at geotourist.com/tours/3909, all ready when you can see the locations for yourself. Thank you for watching. This has been Becoming Bournemouth.